Our theme this morning is the East, what after communism? And that is what I'm talking about. The short 20th century was an era of religious war between secular ideologies. For historical rather than logical reasons, it was dominated by the opposition between two and only two mutually exclusive types of economy. Socialism, this was identified with centrally planned societies of the Soviet type, and capitalism, which was supposed to cover all the rest, at least in the developed countries. This was an apparently fundamental opposition between a system that sought to eliminate profit-seeking private enterprise, the market, and one that sought to eliminate all public or other restrictions on the market. It was never realistic. All modern economies must combine the public and the private in varying ways and to varying degrees, and all in fact do so. Two attempts were made to live up to the full binary logic of these definitions of capitalism and socialism. Both have failed. The state-planned command economies of the Soviet type did not survive the 1980s. Anglo-American market fundamentalism, which was then at its apogee, crashed in 2008. The 21st century will have to reconsider its problems in more realistic terms. How has this affected the countries formerly committed to the socialist model? Under socialism, they found it impossible to reform their state-planned command systems, although their technicians and economists were well aware of the fundamental flaws. The systems, internationally uncompetitive, remained viable insofar as they could isolate themselves from the rest of the world economy. But this could not be maintained. And when socialism, as defined previously, was abandoned, whether by the collapse of political regimes, as in Europe, or by the regime itself, as in China and Vietnam, these states were plunged at moment's notice into what seemed to many the only available alternative: globalizing capitalism in the form which was then dominant, namely the extreme form of free market neoliberal capitalism. The immediate results in Europe were catastrophic. The countries of the former USSR have not yet overcome the effects of this catastrophe. Fortunately for China, its capitalist model was not Anglo-American neoliberalism, but the much more dirigist East Asian tiger economies. But China, on the other hand, launched its economic great leap forward with little concern for the social and human implications of ultra-rapid industrialization. This period is now at an end, and it has eliminated the option for formerly socialist countries of simply imitating capitalism. The global dominance of extreme economic liberalism of the Anglo-American types is also at an end, although we don't yet know just what changes the current economic world crisis, which is the most severe since the 1930s, will bring. Once the shock effects of the past 2 years have been overcome. Only one thing seems already clear. This is a major shift away from the old North Atlantic economies to the South and above all to East Asia. A change in the center of gravity of the economic world, which will have very serious effects politically and in other respects too. In this situation, the former socialist states, including those still governed by communist parties, face very different prospects and problems. I leave out the differences in their political alignments. Most of these states remain very relatively and absolutely fragile. In Europe, some are assimilating to the West European social capitalist model, although at a much lower level of per capita average income. Neither the countries of the former USSR nor those of Southeast Europe have done so or can be expected to do so. The future is going to be most difficult in Southeastern Europe, which is relapsing into a relative and perhaps in some instances an absolute backwardness relating to other parts of the continent. It's more balkanized than ever before and reduced by war, corruption and crime. A dual economy is likely to emerge within the European Union. Russia, having recovered to some extent from the catastrophe of the 1990s, is reduced to being a strong but vulnerable exporter of primary products and energy, and has so far been unable to reconstruct a more balanced economic base. Reaction against the excesses of the neoliberal era have led to a certain return to a form of state capitalism with reversion to aspects of the Soviet heritage. All this confirms that simply imitating the West is no longer an option. This is even more obvious in China, which has developed its own post-communist capitalism with considerable success, so much so that future historians may well see China as the real savior of the world capitalist economy in the current international global crisis.